He was terrifying. That's what wrestling legend Bret Hart said about some of the most dangerous men he ever stepped into the ring with. But here's the thing. When Bret Hart talks about fear, he's not talking about being scared like you or me. He's talking about something way more real. He's talking about the fear of getting hurt by someone who doesn't know what they're doing. The fear of ending your career because your opponent is too clumsy or too reckless to protect you. And in professional wrestling, that's the worst kind of fear there is. Bret Hart is known as the excellence of execution. He grew up in the Hart wrestling family in Calgary, Alberta. His father, Stu Hart, trained wrestlers in a place called the Dungeon. It was a basement where Stu would stretch people and teach them how to really wrestle. Bret learned that wrestling is about trust. You put your body in someone else's hands every single night. If they mess up, you could be paralyzed. You could die. So when Bret says he feared someone, he means they were dangerous to work with. Over the years, Bret has talked about certain wrestlers who made him nervous. Some were too stiff, some were too green, some were just plain unprofessional, and some were legitimately tough guys who could kill you if they wanted to. The internet has been buzzing about a list of 10 wrestlers Bret Hart supposedly feared. Let's break down who these men were, why Bret had issues with them, and whether his criticism was fair or just bitterness from a legend who couldn't let go of the past. Number 10, Dynamite Kid. Let's start with someone who was technically brilliant but personally terrifying. Tom Billington, known as the Dynamite Kid, was one of the most revolutionary wrestlers of his time. He was small, fast, and could do things in the ring that nobody had ever seen before. He was a prototype for the modern high-flying style. But outside the ring, Dynamite was a nightmare. Bret Hart knew Dynamite well. They wrestled together in Stampede Wrestling in Calgary. Dynamite was married to Bret's sister for a time, making him family. But Dynamite was also a bully. He would play cruel pranks on other wrestlers. He would beat people up just for fun. He had a reputation for hazing rookies in the most brutal ways possible. He once broke Mick Foley's jaw with a stiff clothesline when Foley was just starting out. The locker room culture that Dynamite created was one of constant fear and anxiety. Nobody knew when they might become his next target. He would torment people for his own amusement. He had legitimate fighting skills and wasn't afraid to use them on his fellow wrestlers. This wasn't the kind of ribbing that builds camaraderie. This was genuine bullying that damaged careers and relationships. Bret watched Dynamite destroy himself with steroids and dangerous bumps. He watched him turn into a bitter, angry person who hurt everyone around him. The fear here wasn't about Dynamite's wrestling ability. Bret could match him move for move in the ring. The fear was about the toxic environment Dynamite created. You never knew when he might turn on you. You never knew when a rib would go too far and someone would get seriously hurt. Dynamite's personal life was also marked by violence and cruelty. Stories of domestic abuse and violent outbursts were common. He seemed incapable of controlling his anger or treating people with basic human decency. For someone like Bret, who valued professionalism and respect in the business, Dynamite represented everything wrong with the old-school mentality taken to its worst extreme. Dynamite Kid ended up in a wheelchair, his body broken from years of abuse and reckless living. He died alone and bitter. Bret has said that Dynamite was a cautionary tale, a brilliant talent who let his demons destroy him and everyone close to him. The tragedy of Dynamite Kid is that he could have been remembered as one of the all-time greats, but instead he's remembered as a bully who hurt people. Number 9, Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious, also known as Sid Justice and Psycho Sid, was a giant with an incredible look. He was 6'9", muscular, and had a presence that filled any arena. But Bret Hart felt that Sid was dangerous for a different reason. He was unpredictable and lacked basic ring psychology. Sid had a history of erratic behavior. There was the famous scissors incident where he got into a real fight with Arn Anderson in a hotel room in England. Both men stabbed each other with scissors. That's not a work. That's not a storyline. That's genuine violence between co-workers. The incident happened because of a dispute that got out of control, and both men were seriously injured. It showed that Sid was capable of real violence when he felt disrespected or threatened. Sid also had a reputation for quitting companies whenever he felt like it. He would just not show up, leaving bookers scrambling to rewrite shows. This unpredictability made him a nightmare to work with from a business standpoint. You never knew if he would honor his commitments or just disappear when he got a better offer, or simply didn't feel like working anymore. In the ring, Sid was known for soft punches, but dangerous slams. He didn't have the technical skill to make moves look good while keeping them safe. His power bombs, while visually impressive, were often executed without the proper care for his opponent's safety. He would drop people with full weight instead of controlling their descent. This is especially dangerous when you're dealing with a man of Sid's size and strength. Bret viewed Sid as someone who believed his own hype instead of learning the craft. Sid thought his look and his intensity were enough. He didn't put in the work to become a truly skilled professional wrestler. The fear with Sid was that you never knew what you were getting. Would he show up? Would he be safe? Would he decide mid-match to go into business for himself? There were also concerns about Sid's mental state. He was known for being paranoid and difficult to communicate with. Some wrestlers felt that Sid was unstable and might snap at any moment. This psychological unpredictability added another layer of danger to working with him. Number 8. The Road Warriors. Hawk and Animal, known as the Road Warriors or the Legion of Doom, were one of the most popular tag teams in wrestling history. They had the look, the intensity, and the crowd support. But Bret Hart had a major problem with their finishing move, the Doomsday Device. Here's how the move worked. Animal would lift the opponent up on his shoulders in an electric chair position. That puts the opponent about 6 feet in the air. Then Hawk would climb to the top rope and jump off, clotheslining the opponent off Animal's shoulders. The opponent would fly backward and land flat on their back. Bret argued that this move was unnecessarily dangerous. The person taking it had no way to protect themselves. They were elevated high in the air and then knocked backward blindly. One wrong move and they could land on their neck and be paralyzed. Bret contrasted it with the Hart Foundation's Heart Attack, which was a similar tandem move but performed at waist height, allowing for a controlled bump. The problem with the Doomsday Device was that it took all agency away from the person taking the move. In most wrestling moves, the person selling has some ability to protect themselves. They can tuck their chin, position their body, or adjust their landing. With the Doomsday Device, you were completely at the mercy of the Road Warriors' timing and execution. If they were even slightly off, you could be seriously injured. Bret's fear of the Road Warriors wasn't about them being tough guys. It was about their disregard for safety. He felt they prioritized the visual spectacle of their finisher over the well-being of the person taking it. Usually that person was a jobber, a lower-card wrestler paid to lose. And in Bret's philosophy, if you can't do a move safely, you shouldn't do the move at all. The Road Warriors were beloved by fans, but criticized by many in the locker room for being stiff and dangerous. They came from a different era and a different style of wrestling. They worked the territories where being tough was valued above being safe. But when they came to the WWF, they brought that rough style with them, and it didn't always mesh well with the more cooperative approach that guys like Bret preferred. Number 7. Bad News Brown. Alan Coge, who wrestled as Bad News Brown, was a legitimate tough guy. He was an Olympic bronze medalist in judo. He was a loner in the locker room who didn't play by anyone's rules, and Bret Hart had to feud with him in the late 1980s. Bret described Bad News as difficult to work with, not because he was stiff, though he could be, but because he was uncooperative. Bad News didn't understand the role of the heel. In wrestling, the bad guy is supposed to make the good guy look good. That means bumping for them, selling their offense, and eventually losing the match in a way that makes the hero look strong. Bad News refused to do that. He wouldn't bump properly. He wouldn't sell. He acted like he was too tough to be hurt by the babyface. This created a nightmare scenario for someone like Bret. How do you have a good match with someone who won't cooperate? How do you tell a story when the other person refuses to play their part? The fear with Bad News wasn't physical danger, though that was always a possibility with a judoka who could legitimately hurt you. Bad News had real combat skills. He knew how to break arms and choke people unconscious. If he decided to shoot on you to make it a real fight, you were in serious trouble. Most professional wrestlers don't have the skills to defend against an Olympic-level grappler. The fear was that the match would fall apart. The fear was that Bad News might decide mid-match to shoot on you, to turn it into a real fight. In a scripted environment, cooperation is survival. Working with someone who might break that contract at any moment is terrifying. You're out there in front of thousands of people, and suddenly your opponent decides he's not going to let you execute your moves or tell your story. Bad News was also known for having a chip on his shoulder. He felt that he was held back in wrestling because of his race. He felt that he deserved better treatment and bigger pushes. This resentment made him difficult to work with. He would sometimes sandbag, refuse to cooperate, as a way of expressing his frustration with the business. Bret and Bad News had their most famous moment at WrestleMania 4, where they fought over a Battle Royal trophy and Bad News destroyed it. The feud never really clicked because Bad News was so difficult to work with. The matches lacked the psychology and storytelling that Bret was known for because Bad News refused to play his part properly. Number 6. Mabel, Viscera. Nelson Frazier Jr. wrestled under several names: Mabel, Viscera, and Big Daddy V. He was a super heavyweight, often exceeding 500 pounds, and Bret Hart considered him one of the most dangerous workers he ever encountered. The problem with Mabel was simple physics. When you're that size, every mistake is amplified. A normal-sized wrestler might give you a bruise if they mess up. Mabel could crush your bones. And that's exactly what happened to The Undertaker. During a match, Mabel delivered a leg drop that crushed The Undertaker's orbital bone. That's the bone around your eye socket. Undertaker was out of action for months. The injury to Undertaker was particularly severe. His face was visibly damaged. The orbital bone protects the eye, and when it's fractured, there's a risk of permanent vision damage. Undertaker had to undergo surgery and extensive recovery. It was one of the most serious injuries of his career, and it was completely preventable if Mabel had better body control. Mabel also injured Diesel, Kevin Nash, with a poorly executed seated splash. Nash's back was nearly ruined, almost ending his run as WWF champion. The pattern was clear. Mabel hurt everybody he worked with, not out of malice, but out of clumsiness and an inability to control his own mass. When you're 500 pounds, you can't just throw your weight around carelessly. Bret often compared dangerous giants like Mabel to safe giants like Yokozuna. Yokozuna was even heavier than Mabel at his peak, but he was light on his feet. He had agility and skill. Bret said Yokozuna's leg drop felt light as a feather because Yokozuna knew how to control his body. He could position himself so that his weight was distributed properly and his opponent wasn't taking the full impact. Mabel didn't have that skill. He was heavy and uncontrolled. He would simply drop his full weight on people. His splashes were devastating not because they looked good, but because they genuinely hurt. The fear of seeing Mabel on the booking sheet was the fear of being crushed by someone who simply took up too much space to be safe. During Mabel's push as King Mabel in 1995, many top wrestlers complained about having to work with him. The Office pushed him because they wanted a monster heel, but the workers knew he was dangerous. Some guys refused to take certain bumps from him. Others would try to keep the matches short to minimize the risk of injury. Number 5. The Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior was a phenomenon in the late 80s and early 90s. He had an incredible physique, boundless energy, and a unique connection with the crowd. But to Bret Hart, Warrior represented everything wrong with the wrestling business. Warrior was all show and no substance. He would sprint to the ring, shake the ropes violently, and work himself into a frenzy before the match even started. This meant he was completely gassed by the time the bell rang. His matches were short and sloppy. His promos were incoherent, and in the ring, he was dangerous. Bret criticized Warrior for stiff, reckless clotheslines. These weren't the controlled, safe clotheslines that make contact but don't hurt. These were full-force blows that could give you a concussion. The problem with Warrior was that he didn't understand the difference between looking strong and actually hurting people. He thought that hitting hard made him look more legitimate. Warrior once dropped Bobby Heenan carelessly during a spot, injuring the manager. Heenan was a manager, not a wrestler. He wasn't trained to take big bumps, but Warrior didn't adjust his style or take extra care. He just grabbed Heenan and threw him around like a rag doll. This showed a fundamental lack of respect for the people he worked with. Warrior didn't understand or didn't care about the cooperative nature of professional wrestling. He saw himself as a larger-than-life character, almost superhuman. He believed his own hype. He thought that selling for his opponents or working cooperatively would diminish his character. So he would no-sell, refuse to act hurt, and work stiff to maintain his aura of invincibility. Bret has called Warrior a phony hero. He felt Warrior didn't respect the business or the people in it. Warrior was only concerned with his own character and his own paycheck. He didn't care about having good matches or helping other guys get over. He just wanted to maintain his spot at the top of the card. The fear with Warrior wasn't about losing a match. The fear was about getting hurt because your opponent was careless. The fear was about having a bad match because your opponent had no psychology or technical skill. When you worked with Warrior, you knew the match was going to be terrible. You just hoped you'd get through it without getting injured. After Warrior died suddenly in 2014, Bret expressed some regret. He said he wished he had been kinder to Warrior in their last interactions. Warrior had given a speech at the Hall of Fame ceremony the night before he died, and Bret hadn't reached out to reconcile. But he never backed down from his professional critique. Warrior was dangerous to work with. Number 4, Ahmed Johnson. Ahmed Johnson was pushed hard in the mid-90s WWF. He had an incredible physique and a natural intensity. He won the Intercontinental Championship and was being groomed for a main event run. But behind the scenes, Ahmed was known as one of the most dangerous workers in the company. Bret Hart and other veterans like Booker T and Ron Simmons have all said the same thing. Ahmed didn't know his own strength. His finisher, the Pearl River Plunge, was a sit-out double underhook powerbomb. It's a move that requires precision and care. You have to make sure your opponent lands flat on their upper back, not on their neck. Ahmed would execute it with full force, dropping people dangerously close to their heads. The Pearl River Plunge was a devastating-looking move, which is why it got Ahmed over with fans. But from a worker's perspective, it was a nightmare. Every time Ahmed lifted you up, you didn't know if you were going to land safely or if you were going to land on your neck and be paralyzed. There was no consistency to his execution. Ahmed also had a reputation for getting blown up quickly. He would be exhausted after just a few minutes in the ring, and an exhausted powerhouse is the most dangerous opponent in wrestling. When your muscles are failing, you lose the fine motor control needed to safely lift and place a 230-pound man. Your arms start shaking, your grip weakens, and suddenly you're dropping people instead of placing them. Bret's fear of Ahmed was professional liability. Ahmed represented the new generation of wrestler, all physique, no training. He was rushed to the top before he learned how to work safely, and people got hurt because of it. Ahmed himself got injured frequently because of his poor mechanics. He would tear muscles and injure his back because he didn't know how to execute moves properly. The culture of the WWF locker room at that time protected guys like Ahmed to some extent. He was a project. Management wanted him to succeed. They saw him as a potential breakout star. But guys like Bret had to deal with the consequences. They had to get in the ring with someone who might accidentally end their career. Number 3, Seth Rollins. Now we move into the modern era. Seth Rollins is one of the top stars in WWE today. He's a former world champion, a great talker, and an exciting wrestler. But in 2015 and 2016, Bret Hart called him out as unsafe and reckless. Two incidents sparked Bret's criticism. First, Rollins broke John Cena's nose with a knee strike on Monday Night Raw. The knee hit Cena square in the face and displaced his nose. It was a gruesome injury that was visible on camera. Cena's nose was pushed to the side of his face. He had to have surgery to repair it. Second, and more seriously, Rollins injured Sting with the buckle bomb and also injured Finn Balor with the same move. The buckle bomb is a move where Rollins lifts his opponent and throws them backward into the turnbuckle. The problem is that the opponent is thrown blindly. They can't see where they're going or protect themselves. When Rollins threw Sting into the turnbuckle, Sting's neck was injured. This effectively ended Sting's career. Sting was a legendary wrestler who had finally made it to WWE after decades in other promotions. His run was supposed to be a dream come true. Instead, it ended with a neck injury that forced him into retirement. When Rollins threw Finn Balor into the barricade with a buckle bomb, Balor's shoulder was torn. Balor had just won the WWE Universal Championship at SummerSlam. He was supposed to be the new face of the company. Instead, he had to vacate the title the next night on Raw because of the injury. Bret Hart spoke out. He said that a professional wrestler should be in control of their body at all times. Breaking someone's nose is a failure of the work. Ending someone's career with a dangerous move is unforgivable. When Balor got injured, Bret said, "I take no great pleasure in saying I told you so." Bret positioned himself as a voice warning against the modern style of wrestling, a style that prioritizes big spots and crowd reactions over the safety and longevity of the performers. Rollins was hurt by Bret's comments. He said they hurt his feelings, and Bret eventually apologized for the tone of his remarks, but he stood by the substance of his criticism. Unlike Goldberg or Warrior, Bret respects Rollins' talent. He's not saying Rollins is a bad wrestler, he's saying Rollins' style is dangerous. And that fear, the fear that the next generation values spectacle over safety, is what keeps Bret up at night. Number 2, Big Van Vader. Leon White, who wrestled as Big Van Vader, was a massive, agile big man who made his name in Japan. He worked a stiff, brutal style called strong style. In strong style, you make contact look real by actually making it real. You hit hard, you slam hard, you make people feel it. For Bret Hart, working with Vader was a nightmare. Bret has described it with one of the most vivid phrases in wrestling history. Wrestling Vader was like wrestling a cement truck filled with barf. That image captures everything: the weight, the stiffness, the unpleasantness of the experience. Vader's punches were totally real. They weren't worked punches that look good but don't hurt. They were legitimate blows that left bruises and welts. His forearm smashes would knock you silly. His punches to the ribs would leave you gasping for air. Wrestling Vader was like being in a real fight, except you were supposed to let him hit you. Vader's slams were dropped with full weight. When he gave you a powerbomb, you felt every pound of his 400-plus pound frame crashing down on you. Wrestling him for one night was like wrestling 3 normal opponents. Your body would be sore for days afterward, and the thought of wrestling him for a year was unbearable to Bret. In 1997, Vince McMahon gave Bret a choice: stay a babyface and feud with Vader for the next year, or turn heel and work with Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, and Shawn Michaels. Bret explicitly said that avoiding Vader was a factor in his decision to turn heel. He said, "I was thinking anything but Vader." This is a profound admission. Bret was willing to alienate his fan base and turn on his country as a character just to avoid the physical punishment of working with Vader. That's not fear in the cowardly sense. That's the rational calculation of a veteran who knows his body can't handle that kind of beating night after night. Bret was in his 40s at that point. He'd had a long career. He knew that a year of Vader matches would destroy his body. But Bret's fear of Vader wasn't just physical. It was also about hygiene. Bret claimed that Vader never washed his gear. His singlet was sopping wet with sweat from previous nights. The smell was overwhelming. Wrestling Vader meant being in close contact with someone who smelled terrible and whose gear was damp and disgusting. In professional wrestling, bodies are in constant, intimate contact. You're locking up, you're in headlocks, you're grappling. Hygiene is a critical part of workplace safety and respect. A wrestler who doesn't wash their gear is a wrestler who doesn't respect their colleagues. And to Bret, that lack of respect extended to the ring. Number 1, Goldberg. And now we get to the big one, the man who ended Bret Hart's career, Bill Goldberg. If there's one name that dominates every conversation about Bret Hart's fears and regrets, it's Goldberg. This isn't a storyline. This isn't a work. This is real animosity based on a real injury that changed Bret's life forever. Goldberg was a former football player who was pushed to the main event of WCW with minimal training. He had an undefeated streak that made him a massive star, but in the ring, he was clumsy and dangerous. He relied on raw power instead of technical skill, and Bret Hart knew this was a problem from the moment they were booked together. On December 19th, 1999, at WCW Starrcade, Bret defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Goldberg. Before the match, Bret looked Goldberg in the eye and said, "Don't hurt me." He sensed the danger. He knew Goldberg was reckless. He knew that Goldberg's track record included injuring other wrestlers, but the match was happening whether Bret liked it or not. During the match, Goldberg was supposed to deliver a thrust kick to Bret's head. In professional wrestling, this is an illusion. The kicker slaps their thigh to create the sound of impact while stopping their foot inches from the target. Or they make light contact with the flat of the foot while the recipient snaps their head back to sell the move. It's a basic technique that every professional wrestler should know. Goldberg didn't do that. He drove his foot through Bret's skull with full force. Bret has said it felt like being hit by a car. His cognitive functions were immediately disrupted. He was dazed and confused. but he finished the match anyway because that's what wrestlers do. He kept working for weeks afterward, making the injury worse and worse. That kick gave Bret a severe concussion that turned into post-concussion syndrome. He experienced headaches, dizziness, memory problems, and depression. His cognitive abilities were affected. He couldn't wrestle anymore because another concussion could kill him or leave him permanently disabled. The career of one of the greatest technical wrestlers in history was over because Goldberg didn't know how to throw a safe kick. Bret has never forgiven Goldberg. He has said repeatedly that Goldberg was one of the most unprofessional wrestlers in history. He said Goldberg hurt everybody he worked with. He pointed to Goldberg's stiff work with other wrestlers, his dangerous spots, his lack of training. Goldberg's spear was often delivered with too much force. His jackhammer was executed sloppily. In 2022, Bret said that Goldberg belongs in a Hall of Shame, not a Hall of Fame. This comment underscores how deeply Bret feels about this. To Bret, the Hall of Fame should honor those who mastered the art of wrestling, which includes protecting your opponent. By inducting Goldberg, the industry validates a style that Bret spent his entire career fighting against. Goldberg has expressed regret for the injury. He said it's the biggest regret of his career. He's apologized to Bret multiple times. But for Bret, regret doesn't change anything. Regret doesn't give him back the years he could have wrestled. Regret doesn't give him the dream matches he could have had with guys like Kurt Angle or Daniel Bryan. Regret doesn't fix the damage to his brain. Bret's fear of Goldberg was realized in the most catastrophic way possible. It wasn't just a bad match. It wasn't just a bruise or a broken bone that would heal. It was a career-ending injury caused by someone who had no business being in the ring at that level. Goldberg was pushed to the top because he looked intimidating and had an impressive entrance. But he didn't have the skills to work safely. And here's where it gets complicated. Because Bret has also said that Goldberg is a good-hearted person. He doesn't think Goldberg hurt him on purpose. He thinks Goldberg was simply incompetent, and in some ways, that makes it worse. A malicious opponent can be controlled. The locker room can police them, but a clumsy powerhouse is a random generator of injury. Goldberg represents the antithesis of everything Bret Hart believes in. Bret was trained in the dungeon to protect his opponent at all costs. The cardinal rule of the Hart family was that you are the caretaker of your opponent's body. In a predetermined contest, trust is everything. Goldberg was a football player turned wrestler who relied on explosive power and intimidation. Bret valued technical precision and storytelling. He believed wrestling should look devastating while being completely safe. Goldberg valued intensity and destruction. He believed wrestling should be as real as possible. These philosophies were incompatible. When they collided at Starrcade, Bret paid the price. When Bret talks about Goldberg, he's not just talking about one man. He's talking about a philosophy of wrestling that he finds dangerous and disrespectful. He's talking about an industry that pushed untrained athletes to the top because they had the look, not because they had the skill. He's talking about the price he personally paid for that philosophy. Bret has kept this issue alive for over 20 years. Every interview, he brings up Goldberg. Every podcast appearance, he talks about the kick. Some people think he should let it go. Some people think he's being bitter, but Bret sees it as his duty to warn the next generation. He doesn't want another young wrestler to have their career ended by an unsafe worker. The bitter truth. So there you have it, 10 wrestlers Bret Hart feared, from Dynamite Kid to Goldberg. But here's the thing we need to address. Is Bret Hart being fair, or is he just a bitter old legend who can't let go? There's no question that Bret has legitimate grievances. Goldberg did end his career, that's a fact. Vader was stiff. Multiple wrestlers have confirmed this. Warrior was careless. Other workers have said the same thing. These are facts backed up by other wrestlers who worked with the same people. Bret isn't making this stuff up, but Bret also has a reputation for holding grudges. He's been criticized for not moving on from the Montreal Screwjob. 25 years later, he's still talking about Shawn Michaels and Triple H and Vince McMahon betraying him. He's been accused of being too harsh on younger wrestlers who are just trying to make a name for themselves. When Bret criticized Seth Rollins, it hurt Rollins' feelings. Rollins looked up to Bret as a hero. He studied Bret's matches, and then one of his heroes went on a podcast and called him unsafe and reckless. That's devastating. Bret eventually apologized, but the damage was done. When Bret talks about Goldberg, it's been over 20 years since that kick, and he's still talking about it in almost every interview. He brings it up unprompted. He can't seem to talk about his career without mentioning how it ended. At some point, doesn't that cross the line from legitimate criticism to obsession? Bret Hart is a legend. He's one of the greatest technical wrestlers of all time. His matches with his brother Owen, with Stone Cold Steve Austin, with Shawn Michaels, these are studied by every serious student of the business. He helped define what wrestling could be in the 1990s. But he's also human. He's a man who had his career cut short, who was betrayed by people he trusted. Those experiences have made him bitter. There's no other word for it. Bret is a bitter man. He can't let go of his grievances. He can't move past his disappointments. And that bitterness colors everything he says. When he talks about these wrestlers, you have to wonder, is he being objective or is he projecting his anger onto them? So when we look at this list of 10 wrestlers Bret Hart feared, we have to ask ourselves, is this a fair assessment of dangerous workers? Or is this the grudge list of a man who never got over his disappointments? The answer is probably both. Bret's criticisms are based in truth, but they're also amplified by his personal pain and his inability to let go. The excellence of execution has become the excellence of holding grudges. And while his points about safety and professionalism are valid, his delivery has sometimes made people tune him out. He's become the old man yelling at clouds, warning about dangers that the current generation doesn't always see as dangers. But maybe that's okay. Maybe wrestling needs someone like Bret Hart to be the voice of caution. Maybe the industry needs someone to remind everyone that the spectacular spot isn't worth it if someone gets paralyzed. Maybe Goldberg does belong in a Hall of Shame instead of a Hall of Fame. Or maybe Bret just can't move on. Maybe he's stuck in the past, reliving that kick at Starrcade over and over, blaming Goldberg for everything that went wrong. Maybe he's so focused on what he lost that he can't appreciate what he accomplished. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Bret has valid points about safety. The wrestling industry has a terrible track record when it comes to protecting performers. Guys have been paralyzed. Guys have died. Brain damage is rampant among retired wrestlers. Someone needs to speak up about these issues. But Bret's tone and his inability to let go of grudges undermines his message. When he calls out Goldberg for the 100th time, people stop listening. When he goes after a young guy like Seth Rollins, it seems petty. When he can't give a single interview without bringing up old wounds, it makes him look stuck. What we can say for certain is this: Bret Hart's list of feared wrestlers is really a list of everything he thinks is wrong with professional wrestling. It's a critique of an industry that values look over skill, spectacle over safety, and politics over merit. Whether you agree with him or think he's bitter, you have to admit that his perspective comes from decades of experience. Bret Hart dedicated his life to professional wrestling. He sacrificed his body. He sacrificed his relationships. He gave everything to the business. And the business took everything from him and gave him a concussion in return. Can you really blame him for being bitter? So the next time you see a wrestler do something dangerous in the ring, ask yourself, would Bret Hart approve? And if the answer is no, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe Bret's criticisms are worth listening to, even if they're delivered with bitterness. Or maybe Bret just needs to let it go. Maybe he needs to forgive and move on. Maybe he needs to make peace with how his career ended. Either way, Bret Hart will continue to speak his mind because that's who he is. And maybe that's exactly what wrestling needs.